When my son Sawyer was 5 years old, we signed him up to be on the YMCA soccer league. And it was the rec league, and it was so fun. I got to coach this little guy and like 8 little boys. And I'm the kind of mom that's willing to coach until they're like actually good to like third grade, because I'm really good at things like red light, green light, or dribble the little ball around the cones. This is about as much as I can handle. Once I get to like complicated plays and stuff, then someone else can coach the team. But I was the coach on this little kindergarten YMCA soccer team, and it was so fun. In our very first game, these boys, they're all together, and Sawyer is dribbling, and he is dribbling slowly. He's being really adorable, cute about it, and he's going for the goal. But then all of a sudden, off the side of him, another kid from our same team named Braden came over and took the ball from Sawyer. And he took the ball, and he went and he scored a goal, and Sawyer was so upset that the ball was taken from him. Sawyer took out his little finger guns, and he started shooting his little 5-year-old buddy. And here I am on the sideline, and I'm like, Sawyer, put the finger guns away. Congratulate your teammate on a goal. At the break time, I invited Sawyer and Braden to come over, and I said, okay, Braden, now we don't take the ball away from Sawyer. And Sawyer, we don't shoot our teammate with your finger guns. Guys, you are what we call teammates. Now, teammates work together to go get the goal. They pass the ball, they cheer each other on, they high five. Boys, you are on the same team. You see, I think it seems to me that there's so many messages in our world right now trying to pull us together onto different teams. We cheer on our team, and then we vilify the other. We celebrate our team and we yell angry slurs at the other. We think that we're better than them. Like Alex hockey is better than Moorhead hockey, or Vikings are better than Packers, or your political party is better than the other political party. Now, this week's election was just all about that, wasn't it? Pulling people apart on different teams, pulling them all apart on different teams. But if we're honest, like, we live here together. These are our neighbors, our family members, and our friends. We're all Americans. We all want peace and freedom and prosperity for ourselves, for our neighbors, for our children. And there have been people for months and months and months, and there are people still today working so hard to suggest that we are not on the same team. My friends, this isn't new. 4 years ago in that election, the politics got the best of my family, and it ripped us apart. My parents and my siblings and our spouses and even our children are on all parts of the political spectrum, from far right to far left, and every tiny little dot in between. Every little ideation, somebody in our family sort of sits upon that. And my sister Carrie, who I love with my whole heart, she and I were struggling during that time. It was soon after we lost our mom to cancer, and we both made kind of stressful geographical moves. I moved here to Alexandria, and she moved to Okoboji, Iowa. We're both working full time. She has 3 kids. I have 4 kids, and we were strained and busy in our relationship. We'd call, but we couldn't get a hold of each other, and we couldn't really connect because we're both so busy. And here's the thing about Carrie. Carrie and I, we are so similar in so many ways. Sometimes when I catch myself belly laughing, I actually hear my sister's voice instead of my voice. But in so many ways, we are different. We grew up in the same house, only 4 years apart. We even shared a room as a child. But when we look back on our childhood, we remember things really, really differently. What can look like truth to one of us can look like the opposite of truth to the other person. 4 years ago, during the election process, my sister and I, we had a conversation where politics entered in. And I'll be honest with you, it broke us. It broke Carrie and I, and we are sisters. We are family. We are on the same team. One of us was stealing the ball, and the other one was shooting with finger guns. But like my family, many families are just like that, where we end up choosing competition over collaboration, or contention over compassion. We choose conflict over curiosity. So even when we're going towards the same goal, we end up just taking the ball away from each other, or we shoot each other with our words. We aren't our best selves. My friends, one of the things that Jesus did, one of the most radical things that Jesus possibly did during his time here on this earth, was to teach us and to teach his early disciples to shift their thinking, to teach us to slow down, to choose something different, to listen to each other. Jesus taught us to choose collaboration over competition. It says in Romans, "For just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ, we, though many, we form one body, and each member belongs to all the others." Jesus teaches us to choose compassion over contention. Like the story of the Good Samaritan, when the Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the Levite man was. When he saw him, he had compassion on him, this deep kind of compassion. Jesus teaches us to choose curiosity over conflict. Jesus says, "Let any of one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." To realize and to understand each other person, to see their perspective, to lean into each other in our community, whether we think differently, vote differently, look differently, to lean into each other with empathy and with kindness. And the more we realize that despite our differences, we're actually all on the same team. And for the next 2 weeks, what we're going to be talking about is actually families. Because here's the truth. We're leading up to the holidays, and our families tend to be a really big part of that. Whether you like it or not, you're all in one. We're all part of a family. Whether it's a biological family or a chosen family or a community family, or if your family is blended like my family, we are all part of families. This is why we're talking about it in church. Each of our families, every single one of them, no matter how perfect they look on Instagram, but each and every single family has challenges and complications, layers, personalities, systems, family dynamics that make us adversarial to each other. We have families that make us believe that we're not on the same team. But our families, our relationships, and our partnerships, sometimes we get pit against each other. So if we're going to work towards what Jesus taught us to work towards collaboration, compassion, and curiosity, then what we're going to have to do is we're going to have some hard conversations. And let's be honest, for most of us, we didn't grow up knowing how to have hard conversations. We didn't grow up knowing how to be uncomfortable in conversation with the people that we lived in our own house with. And so today our question we're going to ask is, how do we have hard conversations? Well, first I want to talk about what we actually do. In most of our Midwestern houses, if you call yourself Midwestern, there are generally 3 ways that conflict is handled in our own home. The first is that good old Midwestern, a passive aggressiveness. This is characterized by like an indirect resistance, avoidance of direct confrontation or direct conversation. We avoid hard and uncomfortable conversations by kind of trying to sort of skirt around them. We don't want to talk about the thing, and so we talk sort of around the thing. And this can be done in a variety of different ways. Things like backhanded compliments or sarcasm or silent treatment or evading the issues. Now, backhanded compliments, those are things like, "Oh, honey, good for you for trying your best," like indicating that you maybe weren't trying your best. Or, "Oh my gosh, you look so much nicer when you smile." Not saying you look beautiful when you smile, but meaning that the face that you're making isn't comfortable for that other person. Or there's things like sarcasm, things like, "Hey, I'm glad you finally showed up." Or my favorite one that I use in my household is, "Clearly, I'm the only one that knows how to load the dishwasher." We don't say what actually needs to be said. Or sometimes we grew up in families that avoided hard conversations by offering up the silent treatment, choosing not to deal with it at all rather than leaving it out there, leaving the other person who is now receiving the silent treatment trying to figure out what's going on. Sometimes it's like when you get that text that says like, "We need to talk," but then it never ever says what you're going to talk about. And so your brain is left no other options than to come up with like 2,000, 3,000 possible scenarios of what that statement, "we have to talk," is going to ever possibly mean. We use the silent treatment in order to establish some level of control instead of engaging in a hard conversation. Or sometimes passive aggressiveness, it can look like evading issues. This is, it's like when you meet up with a person and you're like, "How are you doing?" They're like, "I'm fine." But you know that they are anything but fine. Like everything they do says that they are not fine. How they walk, how they posture themselves. They keep saying that, "I'm fine," but they're anything but. Another unhelpful strategy when it comes to hard conversations is blame. Now, emotion researcher Dr. Brene Brown describes blame as the following. She says that it's the discharging of discomfort and pain, and it has an inverse relationship with accountability. Blaming is a way that we discharge our anger. My now adult children, when they were in college, I'd call them like sometime around the end of the semester and I'd just check on them and see how they're doing, how their finals were going. And it would always start like this. I'd say like, hey, hi, how's it going? And they'd say, fine. It's like, okay, you don't really sound fine. Are you sure you're fine? Oh my gosh, Mom, will you back off? You are stressing me out. I have autonomy. I am a grown adult and you're being overprotective. And I'd be like, I didn't say anything even close to any of that. Now, the truth is that I'm their mom and I'm safe. I'm going to love them if they blow up at me, if they blame me for something, if they push out their negative emotions, if they discharge their negative emotions onto me at the end of a very stressful semester. These exterior stressors out in their lives had nothing to do with them blaming me for something that I never did. Friends, we all do this. We blame our partner, we blame our boss, we blame our kids, we blame the guy in front of us in traffic, we blame our kids' teachers or our politicians or the blind referee at hockey. We blame other people. We discharge, we push that emotion out instead of dealing with it. We push out our discomfort and pain instead of taking accountability for the emotions and the feelings that are going on within ourselves when it comes to hard conversations. The third unhelpful conflict strategy in my family growing up, we actually called a come to Jesus meeting. I don't know if any of you guys had these. I think that come to Jesus term is actually a Southern term, but I think every family has this experience of a come to Jesus meeting. It's one of those meetings where you actually say, all right, child, you're going to need to sit down. Now you've done something wrong, you've upset your partner or your parents, and now you're going to need a lecture in order to get you right back on the right path. When we had a come to Jesus meeting in my house growing up, my parents would sit us down in my dad's office of all places. We'd sit down and both my parents would sit there and they would dictate to me what was right and what was wrong. There was never any search for understanding or information or insight into what I was experiencing. It was a one-sided lecture, usually with one person in authority over the other. We've come to Jesus meetings all the time. Things like boss to employee or parent to child, sometimes even partner to partner, husband to wife, wife to husband. In a come to Jesus meeting, it's a lecture and not a conversation. It's a monologue and not a dialogue. Now, the truth of us, let's be honest, none of us really like to have uncomfortable conversations. We don't, because they're uncomfortable by their nature. We try and avoid conflict, and we blame, and we try to assert dominance, or we don't want the drama, and so we just try and steer clear and run away from it. So we react with passive aggressiveness, or maybe even sometimes we're just plain passive because we don't want to talk about it. But the problem is when we don't talk about it, what it does is it leads us to these deeper chasms. It leads us to missed understanding and missed opportunities to grow closer. It leads us to conflict, competition, and contention. But my friends, we're on the same team. Jesus put it this way. Jesus said, do not judge or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged with the measure you use. And it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye? Pay no attention to the plank in your own eye. How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly enough to remove the speck from your brother's eye. So back to our original question, how do we actually have hard conversations? How do we have hard conversations that aren't passive aggressive or blaming or come to Jesus conversations? My friends, we are on the same team. And so God invites us to talk about hard things in healthy and productive ways. And I think there's some ways that we can do this. Pastor Ryan Leake suggests that we start like this. I could be wrong. I could be wrong, but this is what I'm feeling. I could be wrong, but this is how I interpreted that moment that we had together. I could be wrong, but I feel like this is what our country needs. Or I could be wrong, but I sense that our marriage has some brokenness. Or I could be wrong, but I think that this is where we should be going as an organization. You see, the statement, I could be wrong, it actually sets us up in this kind of emotional and intellectual humility. It's creating space in your thinking for the possibility of another perspective. It's saying, hey, you, I care about you. I'm creating space in order for us to be on the same team. Last week, we looked at this verse. It says, don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful for building up others according to their needs so that it may benefit those who listen. Now, are you going to have that hard conversation with someone for both of your benefit, to build up others, or have that hard conversation to just satisfy your ego? The truth is that our intention matters. Our posture matters. So holding the thought, I could be wrong, it actually shifts us into a posture of humility in those hard conversations. Or to put it another way, like my kids say, have you ever heard the saying, check yourself before you wreck yourself? Or maybe you've seen this meme, if only I'd checked myself, says the guy who wrecked himself. We check in the mirror for these metaphorical logs that Jesus talks about us, that we have in our own eyes. We have to own ourselves, own our intentions, own our accountability. What can we acknowledge responsibility for in this hard conversation? Are we ready to do and own our part? To acknowledge that there maybe are some power dynamics that exist in our relationship, or that maybe our own ego is experiencing some fragility. To wonder how we've been influenced by the way that we grew up and the way our parents communicated, or to own like what our exterior stressors are, that those finals are really, really stressing us out. So consider what God's posture looks like towards you. God says this about God's posture towards us. God says, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. You see, the truth is, we're still sinners. We're not always right. In a hard conversation, you might not be right. You might be wrong. You see, the truth is that you and whoever you're sitting across the table from, we're both in need of a Savior as much as each other are. So by checking ourselves before we wreck ourselves, what it does is it acknowledges that we are on the same team, that we're on the same team before we go in and we have those hard conversations. Those conversations where we say, like, to our husband, I feel alone. I don't know that I can do this anymore. Or say to your wife, I'm not really as strong as you think I am. Or to say to your kid, you know, when I yelled at you this morning, it wasn't because of what you did. It was actually because of a lot of things that are going on within me. It's checking ourselves before we say to our parents, like, you know what? I don't know what to do either. Or to your sister saying, I need some help. Or to your mom saying, hey, Mom, I worry that I'm not good enough for you. Or to your dad saying, Dad, there's something I need to tell you about me. It's checking ourselves before we say to our brother, hey, I didn't mean it. I apologize. It wasn't my best day. Or saying to your family, hey, I'm sorry that we haven't talked about this before, but I think it's finally time that we do. We have those hard conversations. My friends, you are on the same team. And the truth is, the result you want is something that you're going to do together. So when we take accountability, when we admit, like, I could be wrong, or when we look for that log in our eye, we actually acknowledge that there might and probably is one. The second strategy for our question on how to have hard conversations is to listen to understand. When we're having hard conversations, what actually ends up happening is that most of the time we want so badly for our perspective to be heard, don't we? We want to be heard in these hard conversations. And this is why in a lot of these conversations, we end up yelling. We end up yelling, physically raising our voice because we want so badly for our perspective to be heard. But the problem is that when we're both raising our voices and we both want to be heard, no one ends up actually hearing anyone. We compete to be heard instead of collaborate to listen. Get this, when Jesus was walking around Israel doing all of the good work and ministry that God invited Jesus to do, through the biblical account, Jesus asked 307 questions of people. He asked 307 questions of people so that he could listen and understand their perspective. And guess how many questions Jesus answered when people asked him about himself? He answered only 3, showing us that being good question askers, listening to understand, is the model that Jesus set for us. My friends, we are on the same team. So we got to put aside our need to be heard and listen to the other's perspective. Now, my sister Carrie and I, we struggled for a long time, like a year and a half. And finally, the reaching out didn't really work. And finally it did. And one day, we agreed to meet in Sacred Heart, Minnesota. It's this tiny little town halfway between Alexandria and Okoboji where she lives. And we agreed to meet there on a Friday. We walked up and it was awkward. and weird because we hadn't connected in such a long time. And we sat down at this little tiny cafe, and it was called Kathy's Place, which I thought was appropriate because Kathy's Place is my mom's name. And I gave her a little hug, and she kind of gave me a little hug, and almost instantly there were tears. Before we got to the hard conversation, we started really simple. We started to say things like, so how are the kids? We started talking about how our kids were, and I knew how much I missed my nephews and my niece, and she knew how much she missed her nephews and her nieces, and then after a little while, we got to what was broken in our relationship. So I listened to my sister for 5 hours outside of Kathy's Cafe in Sacred Heart, Minnesota, and she opened up and shared some stuff with me that was going on in her own life, some things that I had no clue about, things I had no idea. And then I started sharing some of the stuff that was going on in my life, things that she had no idea about. And here's the thing, 95% of it had nothing to do with politics at all. It was all grief and loss and frustrations and hurt and uncommunicated expectations that built up over years of just bad communication. There were layers to both of us that neither of us knew existed. And here's the other thing, we were able to reconcile those things. We both apologized. We both said that it was just far, far too long, that this went on for far, far too long. I called her this week and I said, Carrie, I'm gonna share sort of our story in this week's message after the election. And she said, good, tell it. Because if you can keep anyone else from experiencing what we experienced, she goes, I would. And then she said to me, she said, Ange, we're on the same team. I love you. Go do it. My friends, how do we have hard conversations? We admit we could be wrong, and we listen in order to understand. We don't take the ball away from them and we put down the finger guns because we're all on the same team. Jesus taught us that we can choose collaboration over competition. We can choose compassion over contention. We can choose to be curious rather than to engage in conflict. My friends, we can have hard conversations. I know that we can do it. You see, God has this grace-filled life for you, a life where God is always reconciling things. This is God's work in the world. God's always reconciling us to each other through forgiveness, through authenticity, and for freedom. This life of grace where God is just constantly working things back together again. And God adopts you into God's own family and boldly proclaims over you, this is my kid, my beloved, whom I love, who I do absolutely anything for. Friend, God has got you. God goes with you. You can do this because we're on the same team. And on God's team, everyone gets to play. Amen.
All this pain, if I'll ever find my way. I wonder if my life could really change at all. All this earth, could all that is lost ever be found? Could a garden come up from this ground at all? You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of dust. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of us.
please pray with me the prayer that our Lord taught us? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Friends, thank you so much for joining us here today. We have some great, exciting things coming up here at the church, and I want to make sure you know about them. The first is on November 17th. We're offering an event called Surviving the Holidays. It's here at the church at 6 o'clock, and it's a class designed to take a moment to talk about those hard things in our family, like we talked about here today. Could be grief, it could be the loss of a job, could be complicated family dynamics. We're going to partner with some area counselors, and we're going to come up with a strategy. First, we're going to name and create holy space for those difficult things, but then also create a strategy for you as you go into this holiday season. Also coming up, we have a really fun event here in December called Carols and Cocktails / Mocktails. We are so excited to host this over at Gathered Oaks. And we're doing things a little bit different this year. It is on December 5th and December 6th. And because we have so many people that want to join us, we want to make sure that you can reserve a free ticket. All you have to do is go to our website, calvaryalex.org, click on that button, and you can reserve as many free tickets as you want. We just want to be able to get a good head count, and we can't wait to see you there. As we close today, we're going to close with a time of generosity. There are 4 ways that you can give, and they're on your screen. The first is go to that website, calvaryalex.org, and click on the button that says give. Second is you can use our Venmo handle, which is right there on your screen. The third is that you can write a check and mail it to the church at 605 Douglas Street, Alexandria, Minnesota, 56308. Or the fourth is that you can call the church with the number on your screen, and we'll help you figure it all out. Thanks, friends. I'm glad we're on the same team.